You're listening to the Curio-city Collective podcast.
I'm Arpita.
And I'm Deepika.
Can you hear me?
Have I lost you?
No, I can hear you. It got stuck for a minute, but I could hear you.
This is what life sounds like when you're trying to have a conversation on Zoom in two different cities on what I guess was a really bad internet day.
It has been rather challenging trying to do these conversations on Zoom. So was there a reason for the bad internet, or was it just one of those days?
Well, I think that, and I guess just life, because there was, this cocktail of traffic and pressure cookers going off and whatnot. And, yet the show must go on. And Vijay was wonderful and kind, and we plowed through and forgot about the internet after a point because the conversation was so interesting.
Great. So let's begin.
Hi, I'm Vijay Dhasmana, and I've given myself a fancy name. I call myself a rewilder. Somebody who looks at a degraded landscape and tries to rewild it for the wilds, to make it wild and wilderness for people and the wildlife around. So last 15 years, this is what I've been doing. And I have mainly worked in the Aravalli landscape, Aravalli range, mountain range, if you know.
So this is Vijay maybe underselling himself a little bit because his LinkedIn profile says he's a forest gardener.
Well, I guess depending on your worldview and how you define the term isn't quite incorrect. I'm sure he would argue for it. I must say, though, what I'm more curious about is how one goes on to become a rewilder or a forest gardener.
Well, I think that story will tell itself as we move forward, because Vijay didn't begin his working life as a forest gardener, as he explained. He was actually always interested in conservation, but he started off as an activist.
So, I think I started my journey into conservation from being an activist, looking at the conflicts that we have in terms of urbanization and how it is impinging, development and urbanization impinging on the natural resources, on wildlife, on communities who are living on the fringes. So I realized that being an activist, you could do only very little. You could only fight with the system. And often it is draining, often it demotivating. And the results are very little. And I'm very fortunate that the struggles that I have been part of, many of them were very successful. But I realized that as an individual, I want to be constructive. I want to play a positive role. And that's how I went into conservation and rewilding especially. I was very fortunate to have been working in the space called rewilding, where a land can be rewilded, brought back to its glory.
This reminds me of what George Monbiot says in his book Feral, which is also about rewilding. He says how the environmental movement up till now has necessarily been reactive, as in it was often responding to actions by other entities such as governments or corporations or even communities, because conservation implies the negation of action in an ecosystem and letting nature function on its own. And so he goes on to say that where we have been clear about what we don't like, now we also need to say what we would like. We need to show where hope lies. And to him, rewilding or ecological restoration is a work of hope, as Vijay also expresses. So this is not to say that restoration is more important than conservation, just that proactive nurturing work like rewilding can balance the energies between these two.
Yeah, exactly. And while exploring what he found interesting and nurturing, Vijay's had a chance to move around a fair bit working with movements and projects, whether it's Mumbai, Uttarakhand or Delhi. But the project which really brought a strong spotlight to his work is the Aravalli Biodiversity Park, which he spoke of in detail.
But before we get into that, I think it'll be useful to unpack the concept of rewilding itself.
So to understand rewilding, I think it's important to understand what we as human beings have done to the planet. And so if you take example, like we have created a lot of wasteland in process of mining, in process of, dumping, in process of, eroding the natural biodiversity, cutting forests, even agriculture. The land we have included in agriculture many of the lands had become difficult to do agriculture in, and now they need rejuvenation of soil and the plant life in that. So what is rewilding is essentially to bring back the flora, habitat, and the wildlife into that particular landscape.
You know, in the documentary A Life on Our Planet, David Attenborough says how to restore stability to our planet, we must restore biodiversity, the very thing that we've removed. And it's the only way out of this crisis we've created. We must rewild the world. And really, rewilding projects like the one Vijay has been part of and continues to work on are central to helping nature heal.
This urgency in Attenborough's voice was also echoed in the theme of this past year's World Environment Day, which launched the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration with the tagline Reimagine, Recreate, Restore. It highlights both the perilous situation with regard to the climate crisis and other linked issues, but also points to the way out of our despairing situation through this process of restoration. And what I found fascinating was that they aren't just speaking of this with regards to land, but also the oceans, other ecosystems, and how that is linked up with ending poverty, combating climate change, preventing species extinctions, stopping desertification. There are just so many connections to make there.
Absolutely. And I think in my chat with Vijay, what came across was the nuance and wisdom that is built into this concept of rewilding, as you go deeper. The very term ecosystem restoration seems simple enough on the surface, but it contains multitudes really, because no two ecosystems are the same. And they each have their own unique personality, and hence there's no one simple fix-it solution.
Every forest has its unique flora or habitat, so to say. So when you rewild, what you try to do is what is unique to that particular landscape, you recreate that habitat. So like in the Aravallis, we have about 7-8 kinds of forests in different stages of degradation. So we recreate that. So on the hilltops, we have a different forest. On the slopes, we have different forests. In the valleys, we have different forests. In the alluvial plains, we have different forests. In the dry, sandy, where the sand is moving, we have different forests. So you take all of that information in account, and then you do the rewilding projects.
So basically, when you consider the idea of rewilding a denuded space, you first need to understand the ecosystem, what it had been like when it was flourishing.
Yeah, and in so many ways, rewilding is a shift in a worldview, really. It's about addressing the man-nature conflict, at the heart of which is a certain disregard and disdain for nature. I mean, in order to truly change this relationship to one of a partnership, rewilding is asking us to cultivate this quality of listening, of informed action. So Vijay spoke of how he followed the historical and scientific trail of botanists and other specialists who've written about these spaces, and began to get a real sense of how the ecosystem functioned when it was in its full bloom. He particularly mentioned Champion and Seth, who were pioneers in recognizing and classifying forests in India back in the 60s.
The thing that struck me just now as you were speaking is that we tend to think of the wild as being separate, somehow pristine, untouched, segregated from the spaces we occupy and live in, such as our urban cityscapes, right? And yet you said Vijay's most prominent project was in Gurugram, which I am sorry to say is more famous or infamous for being very built up and bare.
Yeah, that occurred to me too. At the word wild, one's brain immediately leaps to a national park or some such space. And so I asked him this specific question on how he felt urbanization interacts with this idea of rewilding.
When we look at urbanization, the right urbanization should be with that objective that we want to give quality of life to people. Unfortunately, the whole momentum of urbanization has been that it is devoid of quality of life. What is quality of life? Quality of water, quality of food, quality of education, entertainment, and air. All that is, it is, I'm surprised completely. It goes out of any logic that what we are doing to our urban spaces, or even development for that matter, is contrary to what it should be. Look at Delhi, look at the whole larger NCR region. It's one of the most polluted regions in the world. So
where else would you need to do rewilding other than the spaces which are most challenged? And these are the spaces which are most challenged.
Also, he pointed out something I think we all lose sight of in our daily interaction with our cityscapes, that they weren't always like this. Taking a historical view actually reminds us that these lands were also once wild and untamed and part of contiguous forests and ecosystems. And it's only by long-term human intervention that they look and feel quite the way that they do. And there was the second thing he said which I really loved, and I think maybe that's about extending the idea of rewilding to ourselves.
There are enough studies now which tells us that if you have a connect to the wilderness, if children are looking at birds, even adults are looking at birds, there is some sense of well-being. And it happens in terms of connect.
At TCC, we've been sharing a lot of this research on our previous episodes and in our social media spaces. There is, as Vijay says, a growing body of research that points to the beneficial effects that exposure to the natural world has, whether it's, on health, reducing stress, or promoting healing.
I've done enough walks with children to see that a child's eye get, all light up when they look at a bagworm moth cocoon. And they look at, sticks all woven together. And they ask, what is it? And then you tell them this is a particular moth which has made a shell around itself of the sticks that plant it is in. And it's going to release itself, in some time once it's mature. It's so competitive, stressful life. And the wild spaces and rewilded spaces are very, very important for the city. A rewilded space also gives an additional benefit that the city comes together and creates that wild space.
There's this concept of nature deficit disorder that Richard Love coined, which speaks to how increasingly children are spending more time indoors and losing out on the benefits of being outside. In his rather famous book, Last Child in the Woods, Love points out that the human costs of alienation from nature can include diminished use of the senses, attention difficulties, higher rates of physical and emotional illnesses, and so much more. And, thinking about these really makes me appreciate the idea, the potential that a wild space integrated into the urban environment can hold for kids. But, tell me more about the coming together bit that Vijay is speaking of here.
Yeah, so let's get into the Aravalli Biodiversity Park project, which has really been a prominent undertaking of Vijay's.
So I was called up by a friend of mine called Pradeep Krishnan, who has written books on trees. One of them is Trees of Delhi, and the second is Jungle Trees of Central India. And he called me up and he said that there are some passionate people in Gurugram who want to do some planting work. Would you please have a look?
So this was in 2011 and the group was called I Am Gurugram. This is a voluntary group founded by 3 women, Latika Tukral, Swanzal Kakapur and Ambika Agarwal. And as a citizens' initiative, they wanted to plant 1 million trees and create a nature park on this old mining site at the edge of Gurugram.
And what was being mined there?
So it was this big piece of land of about 380 acres, which is I think the equivalent of around 292 football fields, which had been mined for quartzite, which is like the decorative stone used as kitchen tops or flooring. The mining had actually been stopped a while back, and what Vijay was faced with was this barren, rather inhospitable piece of land, which is really a pity because it was once very much contiguous to the Aravalli forest range.
I think the first thing when I saw the land, it was a barren wasteland full of invasive species. We call it alien invasive species because they don't belong to this landscape. And something called Mexican mesquite or Prosopis juliflora, which was brought in by British. And it was in the shrub form in this landscape. And largely it was an open land with gravel all around. There was nothing, a few species of grasses you did find. But because there was so much of movement of vehicles and maybe burning so much that there was no large trees in that landscape, And what we found, I think there were 2 peepal trees that I remember. That's all was there in that landscape.
That sounds really heartbreaking for a forest to have somehow been reduced to that. You've shown me the pictures and we'll put them up on our social media so people can see them.
Yeah, don't forget the important point there about invasive species that Vijay makes. An invasive species is an introduced organism that negatively alters its new environment. These species, like the prosopis that Vijay mentions, they can adversely affect the invaded habitats and bioregions, causing immense ecological, environmental damage and change.
When you look at a landscape which is wild, there is so much happening. There is so much drama happening, There is, when it is in flower, you have bees and insects and birds which are pollinating it, fertilizing it in the food forms. Then you need another vector, which is a bird or an animal or that will eat that fruit and then take it far off, and then another plant will happen, and there is drama going on all the time. There is life happening, and I think for me it is much more valuable when we start seeing the whole drama of life happening, unfolding under a tree or a habitat.
And this drama that Vijay is talking about, which is basically a whole lot of flora and fauna working in complex interactive networks of interdependency, is possible within an ecosystem because of centuries of evolution. Now, the issue with an alien species is that it's not woven into the fabric of that ecosystem. So a lot of the times, not only is it not able to support the local biodiversity, but because it's alien to the ecosystem, it doesn't have any local biocontrol mechanisms that can contain its spread. And that's why the word invasive, because it literally takes over the landscape.
So to put that in perspective, not only was the land first shorn of all that was originally part of its Aravalli range habitat, thanks to the intensive mining operation and ill use, but it had since also grown a second skin of this alien vegetation?
Exactly. This was the monumental challenge that was ahead of this team of people when they decided to take up the project. And when Vijay first joined the project, it wasn't necessarily about rewilding. At that point, it was a project to plant 1 million trees.
So when I came, I said, have the plants arrived? They said, yeah, they have just arrived. So then I opened up the truck and looked at the plants, and I realized that none of them were native. While we were thinking that native plants would come, but none of them were native plants. So that gave me a hint that actually, the journey has to be different. And then I had a negotiation with them. I told them that let's think through this. It's not about planting. It's about recreating habitats. It's about creating a vision for the city. And we thought about it. We created a vision for this place, a place that resonates with the city, a place that connects with the people, a place that is a ground recharge place, a place that's a research place for biodiversity and flora. And that was the vision that we created.
Vijay worked with the group, which was its own process, really. It involved lots of conversations and even visits to the existing Aravalli forests, such as Sariska, and slowly and surely they collectively shifted the vision that was to guide the work in the park to accommodate the deeper concept of rewilding, and in some manner returning the land to the forests and the forests to the city.
We said, why not to turn the tide? Why not to, make a statement in this 380 acres and give a slogan that we are bringing back the forest into the city, bringing back the wilderness into the city, because it is important for us to understand that without forest, we don't exist.
And that is quite powerful, and I can imagine a challenge in itself. The vision statement means a lot, doesn't it, in terms of how we begin to understand, assimilate, and carry out an idea. But there is still the actual process of carrying it out.
Yeah, and that's where we arrive at the coming together bit you were asking me about earlier, So once they had this vision, it was on to execution of actually putting together the project.
I remember my colleagues, Latika, Preeti, Swandal, telling me that, they had to get money from their family and friends to support the plantation in the park, because nobody wants to put in their money to something that they are not sure of. So first year it was like this. Second year onwards, people started coming in and corporates started coming in. And they are the ones who supported the plantation drives in the park.
And from Vijay's description, it felt like everyone from the municipality to the local school kids were all involved in this.
In the case of Aravalli Biodiversity Park, there were 70 schools who came together. There are thousands of citizens who came together, and the corporates and 70 plus corporates who came together in making this park.
The core group tried to involve as many people in groups as possible with the hope of actively creating a sense of being a stakeholder in the creation of this park.
Children, they came because we wanted them to be the custodian of this place and to be participant in this whole movement of creating wild. So children were essential in this whole journey. And the corporates, because they were willing to send their volunteers, and most of them were young people and it gave us immense opportunity to talk to them and explain it to them. What are Aravallis? How old they are? Why these kind of forests exist? Today we don't have to advertise anything. People just come in and call you every year that we want to do a plantation drive. Can we help? Can we come? We are ready to put in money and so on and so forth. There is definitely an opportunity when we are rewilding something. You can get the whole city around it to rewild a space together. And that I find is the most beautiful part of the work that I have done so far. It's not a private small entity or, something that's exclusive for people. It's a public park. It's for people. It's for people to cherish and connect with.
I love that they gave the process just as much thought as the idea of the park itself. And imagine the fondness and sense of ownership and belonging it creates for kids who might have planted trees there. I mean, I can just hear them say, "Let me show you my tree," which immediately changes one's relationship with the public space.
Definitely. I mean, I used to live in that part of the city when I was growing up, and I remember the barren, sort of caved in cliffs from the mining that used to be done there. And then when I visited the park a few years ago, I was struck by the transformation it's undergone. But there was more to the process than just getting people together.
Of course, it was only 2 months in the year that all this will happen. Rest of the year, it was slog. You had to take care of the plants. You had to see that the people who are taking care of the plants are taken care of, and so on and so forth.
The what to, how to plant bit was actually a major part of the process conundrum. Our long preoccupation with exotic flowering trees and economically viable species led to a major challenge.
Look at the airport, Delhi airport, or Mumbai airport for that matter. What have you done? You have put up completely disjointed plants which have no relationship, and when you put a wild species, you are creating relationship. You're creating networks of different organisms together, and that relationship enhances the whole habitat together.
This preoccupation with exotic ornamental trees in cities, and often trees plucked out of their native landscapes, meant that when faced with the challenge of restoring a forest landscape, Nursery had a very limited palette to offer in terms of tree saplings for this project. They just did not have the tree saplings that were relevant to this ecosystem.
We are very lazy. We don't look at the wild. We don't appreciate the wild, except for the tigers. We don't look at wild from that perspective. And there is a lot that we can bring to our urban spaces from the wild. Like somebody has calculated that of the 2,000 odd species of trees that we have in this country, I think we use less than 100 species. So just imagine there is so much scope for us to use from the palette of plants that we have. And trees, I'm just talking about trees. We're not talking about climbers, shrubs, and others.
So how did they manage to make the shift when there were no saplings available?
So to make their vision a reality, Vijay had to don the hat of a seed collector. He and his team roamed the Aravallis and collected seeds for the nursery that they then had to build from scratch. He also meticulously noted how they worked in tandem with each other and within which microhabitats.
I'm now totally beginning to see what he means by his designation as a forest gardener.
Quite. In fact, in an article in Conservation India, he wrote on how he was absolutely determined to learn as much as he could by observation and explains how he noted that different tree types belonged on different parts of the landscape. So, for example, babul only grows where the soil is deep and of good quality, with water close to the surface, while dhau on steep rocky slopes. He writes in that article that the idea was not to make this park into a dense woodland, but to create diverse habitats, including grasslands, that would then support varied forms of life typical of northern Aravalli.
I can't imagine that it was easy at all, but it sounds so worth it really.
Truly, because, as the before-after pictures show us, that coming together of hands and hearts of so many over the years has managed to transform that once barren land into a wild forest again.
it was mined area, and you could see crushers, 8-stone crushers, has transformed into a habitat where you get more than 200 species of birds. You have 8 species of amphibians, which is rare in a particular spot. You have snakes of all kinds that you find in that kind of a terrain. You have amazing population of insects, because that's the base of the pyramid on which other life form exists. And we have a diversity of more than 250 to 300 species of plants that we have brought into this landscape and created these forests.
At last count, 1,45,000 plants of 200 species in the park were planted by children and adults and citizens.
That does sound like a tremendous transformation. Really, like you said, one sees these before and after pictures of such projects, and somehow it seems doable and easy, which is of course the point of such pictures, to provide inspiration. Yet tremendous amounts of tenacity, the free giving of your time and hard work goes into making these citizen-led initiatives such as this one become a reality.
Absolutely. And what's interesting though is that even though the project and its vision and outcome both have been hailed as a success story, there have been quite a few challenges through the years, or battles as Vijay refers to them. They've had to fight several times to save the park from conversion into a zoo or a crocodile park or this Singapore-style night safari, and then most recently from a highway cutting through the center of the park.
So how did they battle it out?
Well, that's where the stakeholders, the people who participated in raising the forest, had a part to play, both adults and children, which also proves the value of a democratic participative process.
Children have shown me that, they can do something. Like this whole road business, 4,000 children came to protest against the park, this road through the park. And they're always ready. And it's not just rhetoric that somebody has fed into them. While partly it could be, but a lot of it is also seeing the destruction every day. Every day, so much of destruction is happening to our natural world. And so I see that light, that sense of delight when they see a wild mystery unfolding in front of them. That's hope for me.
I'm so glad to hear that they've been able to fight for and keep the vision of the biodiversity park till date. Yet I was thinking how, the continued conflict does reflect the tensions in vision and planning, even in terms of how we understand development within cities.
Indeed, and Vijay did speak to the urgent need to do things differently.
And I think we have to look at development from a different lens. Otherwise, what has happened in this race of developing and GDP, we have lost wilderness. We have lost our wilds. And it's not just wilderness for the sake of wilderness. It has so much ecological services that it provides. Like Gurugram draws 300% more water, which is 3 times more water than it goes into the ground. Yeah, and that's the case with Faridabad. That's the case with Delhi. And so, large part of India, we are just exploiting natural resources with this belief that you can transport the ecological services from one side to another.
Indian cities are in such a dire state. This project is an example of how cities can be built differently, how we can begin to shift a relationship of conflict and exploitation into one of partnership. But this idea needs to go further than that one project. It needs to percolate into our planning and our very notions of development. In fact, this is already taking place in cities like Madrid, which is building an urban forest in the city in a bid to combat climate change.
I would like to, I think it is important when we look in the city that when we do a city planning, we look at where residential places are, where commercial spaces are, where the roads are going to move, where the drains are going to move. We look at all those aspects, where the schools are going to be, where our playgrounds are going to be. What we miss is where the wilds are going to be, where our forests are going to be. And we have to integrate forests into our cities. There is no shortcut. We will have to integrate wilds into the city. Urban spaces have ecology, which is under stress. We have mongoose, we have civets, we have bats, we have birds of many, many kinds. Like Delhi boasts bird population of about 400 species that are recorded in Delhi and close regions. 400 species of birds recorded every year. That's a huge chunk. So instead of cutting them off, why don't we plan for it? And urbanization is our future. We will make more and more urban spaces. So we have to create another layer, which is the wild layer. That these are the wild areas in our cities where people can experience the wild. And I also often say this, that a wild space cannot be saved if humans don't react or interact creatively with that wild space.
As an urban gardener, I was listening to your conversation with Vijay and also thinking about how maybe in very small ways we all can practice the principles that the Aravalli Biodiversity Park is built upon. Maybe we can't quite, create a forest in our homes, but we can nudge the process of rewilding the city along in little ways.
Actually, this was something I did ask Vijay about. How do we as citizens begin to embody the idea of rewilding?
See, usually the rewilding word is associated with larger landscapes or introduction of species. But I think what an individual can do and what a collective can do. Individual, as I mentioned before, your plant palette in your house can be native, can be bird and butterfly friendly, bird, butterfly, bee friendly. You don't pump toxic chemicals into your rose and, whatever plants that you have in your garden. That's the first step. Second step, you don't release chemicals in the soil or in your, flush it down into your STP or, so be conscious about it so that, because that's going to go somewhere and destroy somewhere, whether it is the rivers, whether it is the dumping of solid waste, you are going to impact it badly. So to be mindful of it is second step at a personal level. Third, you should support people who are doing rewilding project. Fourth, you should give your voluntary support to them. You should go and work with them into the rewilding projects or conservation projects that they are doing in your vicinity, in your city. I think that's very, very important. And fifth, challenge. Question the government, question the people who are into the authority about the steps they are taking. So making your governments accountable, making powerful people accountable is another very, very responsible job that you can do in terms of rewilding. And if you happen to get larger space to work on, then there are principles are very simple. Look at the wild space next to your, city or like in the Aravallis, you go to the Aravalli forest, best of the Aravalli forest that you can see around. Pick up the flora that is there, the plants that grow in that wild landscape and bring them back into the city is what we have done. And we are very proud of it. And I'm sure every citizen can do it.
In TCC's book club reading circle, we read Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, Braiding Sweetgrass. And I'm reminded of something she says in it, which is action on behalf of life transforms. And though we haven't spoken to it explicitly in this conversation, I can't help but sense that is the real story here, one of understanding and shifting the underlying relationships that exist between land and its flora and fauna, land and its people.
Yeah, and I think it's reflected in Vijay's own journey and choice to be a forest gardener and the amazing grit reflected in the I Am Gurugram collective's effort, not only to make this project a reality, but then to ensure that there'll always be custodians to those forests beyond themselves. As she says, the relationship between self and the world is reciprocal. It's not a question of us getting enlightened or saved and then acting. As we work to heal the earth heals us.
Since the recording of this episode, the Aravalli Biodiversity Park was declared India's first other effective area-based conservation measures site on the occasion of World Wetlands Day in Feb 2022. which designates the area as a biodiversity hotspot on the international map. It's a testament to what is possible when there is citizen support to protect biodiversity. In another part of the country in Mumbai, however, the RA Conservation Group, a citizens group, is fighting to conserve the RA forest, which is a green lung of the city. It is again in the limelight as the government is looking to build a metro car shed on this land. The move has seen individuals, students, environmentalists, NGOs coming out in support of the forest. If you're wondering what you can do in your city, join a citizen group, talk to people in your circle about these issues, and advocate to protect the biodiversity in your city.
Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more episodes. You can follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or a podcast app of your convenience. We're also on YouTube, so look up the channel, The Curio-city Collective, or follow us through our social media pages. And most importantly, if you like what you're hearing, please do share these episodes with your family, friends, and community members. Leave us your thoughts, comments, and feedback. We love hearing from you.
TCC is a not-for-profit initiative that is funded by you, the listeners. If you'd like to support the work that we do at TCC, there are different ways that are listed on the support and contribute page of our website, www.thecuriocitycollective.org. You can also write to us at team@thecuriocitycollective.org or message us on 6300-711-451 if you feel called to make a contribution to sponsor an episode or a podcast series. This could help us with our research, writing, admin, and editing costs to build further resources that speak to our collective well-being. We hope you'll join us on this journey of co-creating the space to nurture and build cities that are healthy and happy. This podcast was created by Srinidhi Raghavan, Deepika Khatri, and Arpita Joshi. The sound editing was by Vijay Chawla.